Interesting.
Okay, and so I don't know, Scott, is it possible for you to pan down here? Or
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so what I thought I would do is I would show you guys that a lot of times when I'm doing these sort of fun color paintings, I just look at all these tubes of paint. So I have just a bunch of tubes of paint of different varieties of pinks. So I have slightly warmer pinks, slightly cooler pinks, bluer, redder, all this stuff. And so, and there's not one good or bad. But what I do is I just put them on my palette, and it's easier for me to see on a white palette, right? It's just easier to see the actual temperatures. Like I can see this is permanent matter medium, which really is a replacement for alizarin, because alizarin, I was told, isn't as great. And Rembrandt now really suggests using permanent matter, medium, deep, or light. And so that's just a permanent matter, which would be an alizarin. And then this is, I think, a permanent red violet. It has a little bit more of a magenta blue. And then this, I think, is a quinacridone rose.
Put that tube up if you want.
Oh, well, I mean, it's just different brands, and this could be almost like a permanent rose or a quinacridone rose. This is a color that I am loving, and I actually ordered a giant tube of it. This
Question between permanent something and something that doesn't have the permanent.
It's just more steadfast.
It'll fade. The non-permanents will fade over time quicker.
Same thing as steadfast. It's light permanency. So, and that's why a lot of paints, you see the word permanent, because probably over time artists were complaining and saying, if a painting was in a window, or you'd see the colors fading over time. And you could probably tell too, if you buy a tube of paint, you guys, especially Rembrandt has series. And series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something. Now this is a series 3. I think as you get higher in the series, it's more expensive, which means that the material is more expensive, it's harder to make. I remember Jeff from Rembrandt talking about how certain colors, it takes weeks to make. I mean, it's not just we don't even know what goes into this stuff.
Or cobalt violet is.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's chemistry, there's mixing, and some paints need to mix more and then has multiple ingredients, and so that's what creates the price and also the intensity. As I'm sure you guys know, as you put paint out, you realize that some paint is incredibly intense, and a baby step of paint will oh my god, it will tint something so strong, and then another is more weak. So I'm not a super strong expert on it, but this is what I like to do, is I like to lay out paints, and then I like to mix some white into them to see the differences. And so this permanent matter is more of just a traditional alizarin. It's a basic all-around dark pink. This, what is this? This is actually a permanent red violet, but it reminds me of a magenta, or it has more blue in it. And then this is more of a, let me add some white to this. So this is what I like to do so that I can understand the properties, right? So then I have, the lighter versions of every color. And this is more like a permanent rose or a quinacridone rose. And believe me, I don't even know what quinacridone means. I was introduced to quinacridone a couple years ago, and then just started to realize that a lot of people were using it. So you can just find it everywhere now. So it's obviously just a man-made product. It's not, but so that's that. And this is the color I was going to tell you guys about. I can only get it through Vasari. And what I'm thinking, what it reminds me of, it's a grade, it's like a dusty rose, and it almost looks like a really intense dark Terra Rosa. Because Terra Rosa does not go that dark. because inherently Terra Rosa is a value around a 5 or 6. But this Capuchin Red Deep is just so beautiful. I don't know. You don't buy it just because I say it. Capuchin Red Deep. And like everyone is gonna have like a different, like 5 months from now, maybe I'll have a completely different color that I'm in love with. I think I had this in my drawer and I started to use it, and then I was like, oh my god, I'm running out of the small tube. I better buy a bigger tube. Another things that I've really loved is these Gamblin Radiant series. I just love them, and I think what they
I love the Gamblin Radiant.
yeah, so they're just generic convenience colors, right? So they're just they're pre-made, these pastel colors that honestly might even just be lighter versions of another color, because I do know that in Rembrandt, those cool grays and warm grays, I remember Jeff telling me the cool gray, I think literally is just ivory black and white. They're convenience, so it's like you can mix them. It's just already there. So that's what I think probably a lot of the Radiant ones are, is like they're just other colors, then they're just slightly a lighter version. And then this is just cadmium red. So that's my warmest red. And then you just see like different versions, a gray, and then a bright pink, a blue pink, and then a neutral. And so these are what I start to play with. And I literally just start my painting out with this. And then possibly on top, like I did with that, the black man, is possibly, if I did my whole painting in magenta or my whole painting in these pinks, then maybe a blue violet or maybe a viridian I will start to play with to go in the lights. Just because it's so cool, it will look so much bluer on top of these. And then it's all relative, right? It's kind of interesting. But, so just like in the actual drawing, trying not to be hyper realistic, I'm really playing with just colors, and colors that I never would have thought of playing with or would have been too scared of in a traditional portrait. Like, I would have just been too scared to use any of these. They'd be perfect if you were going to paint gardens, but for me, like doing an actual portrait, I think I would have always just shied away. Okay, so I chose this photo just because it was so completely, it was so light and dark that there's not a lot of guessing. So, okay. And I want you guys just to notice how close I have my board to my monitor. So I have my monitor on this, like, you could put them on a little book stand or a little shelf. So I have it at eye level. And I try to get things as close as possible so that when I step back, I can see them in the same alignment. All right, so how would I start this? And I mean, obviously my background is black and this is white, so that's going to be different, but I don't care. I'm going to, so Scott's probably going to keep the camera on my painting mostly, but I'm just going to see about which. In the very beginning, I probably would use a somewhat bristle or kind of like a mixed hair, something that's sturdy to kind of do what I would call scumbling. Like you literally take paint and you're like keeping your brush on it and you're just kind of scumbling it, pushing paint in. So I'm going to put down the generic, or what I would say home base value, and it's pretty light. So I'm going to mix some white, some just titanium white. And I'm going to just do this Capuchin, what's it called again? Capuchin Red Deep. And I'm going to just mix a value that I'm going to consider to be my home base. And I don't want to use too much mineral spirits, because if I use too much mineral spirits, it will probably thin it down too much to where when it dries, that black will kind of show through and make it look darker. So to me, like, this seems like it has a lot of color, especially because it's right next to this white. But let's see what it looks like. And I want you guys to also see. Look what I do. I literally do this. So, I just.
You mean you're measuring against the screen?
I'm measuring against the screen. So I have my image and my painting be the exact same size so that I could literally just do simple little this is, the kind of drawing that I do. I make my image a certain size so that I can just transfer it. And also, I want you guys to notice that if this is the middle line, I'm pushing the face a little bit to the left. I don't want the center of her face to go straight down the middle because of the fact that I see the back of her hair, right? So this is what I call scumbling. So you see how I put my brush down and I scumble. So I'm keeping my brush on here and I'm just mushing paint to fill in. I'm painting like through this eye. So meaning that I'm not worried, I'm not drawing around the eye shape. So it's a little bit hard to see because her face blends in. So I'm just kind of how her forehead goes up and then it turns and it kind of goes filling in. And remember, I was telling you guys that I don't want to thin it out too much, because if I thin it out too much, then this black is going to, it's going to start to show through and get darker. But you see, so this is important. This is a very important thing that's why I wanted to show you, is that how you guys keep your brush and you scumble and you fill in. It's not just not just putting a dab down. It's like filling in. All right, so now I'm going to take a little, and I'm using as little as mineral spirits or Gamsol. And then I'm just going to start to fill in the bottom because the bottom half of her face is a little bit darker. The largest, and this is what I would say the largest angle. So this is scumbling in the light shape of her face. Because her hair, her hair is pretty dark. So it's not that I would leave it this value, but I could do more of a transparent wash and let some of this value kind of influence my paint, right? It's the same thing as working on white. You're just thinking the opposite, whereas maybe on white, you let some of the white influence your light, but then you have to keep going darker and darker in the hair. I'm just doing it the opposite. So I just have to make sure that my light is solid enough so that when I do transparent in the hair, I can let that be influenced. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush, because if I'm going to fill in a slightly bigger area, I definitely like to use a slightly bigger brush. So I'm just going to and I'm taking a little bit of Gamsol and just my pile that's right next to my skin pile. And then the color is so vibrant, but because this black is such a neutral that any color next to it looks pretty. So you see how I'm just sort of putting in, it's like the shadow of the face. And I'm not worried about any small shapes. So any small shapes would be like her ear, her earring, any sort of that bounce, anything that's happening in her neck. So these are when you think about what are the largest shapes, you're just thinking about what's in the shadow and what's in the light. So you see how I'm scumbling, going through the neck, into the hair. So, yeah, so exactly. So this value, it probably is hard to see on here on my palette. I would say it's about a value 1, but then this is maybe a value 1.5, 2, and then this is definitely like a 6, definitely, for sure. And so I'm allowing myself to go darker and darker, so that as I start to build in all the larger shapes of this head, then at the very end, I could put like a little dark accent right here, or maybe a dark accent, so I'm building up to my darks. Okay, so now I'm going to just do what I would call the darks of the face, or sometimes I even say like the sunglass, because it goes all the way from the top of the eyebrow. See, I have paint on that canvas, so what this is telling me is that I have to put even more paint on my brush. Because when you are painting dark on top of light, you know that anything you do underneath is just going to pick up. So I'm doing the eyebrow till it angles up, and I'm painting all the way through. And you see how, because I have paint there, I have to re-establish paint on my brush. So I'm going back to my palette, I'm putting more paint on my brush, and I also want you to see that I'm re-establishing a lot, because if I just kept scumbling, it will just get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. This is the tricky part. This is the part where people get a little bit too finicky, or they start to second guess themselves because they're so nervous about the drawing. Because, oh my gosh, well, I need to get the exact drawing of that eye. Well, I'm saying do the larger shape and then just drop that eye on top. So you walk up the eyebrow and then you walk down that angle, and you see how right there that kind of value blends in with that temple and then just kind of blends in with that hair. So you see how it kind of goes right into here. And then I walk down, and then all of a sudden that eye kind of comes down here to the ball underneath. She is I chose this photo too because she has such beautiful eyes that, you know, you really see the underlid, whereas not every model you do. So this is the whole eye shape, top of the eyebrow, through the eye, all the way underneath where the ball is. And I'm really, really conscious about angle. So it's like up and then down, and then connecting this to the outer side. And before I go any further, what I do is I walk over from this shadow edge, I walk over the light and I draw in that eye. Because I need to have this to be able to do plumb lines, to go down to the nose, especially when you're doing any sort of profile or 3/4. So I'm going to put my brush up on the monitor and see, is one eye higher than the other? You know, once you get one shape, I realize that this outer eye is just tilted a little bit down because just perspective. You start, you know, usually the head is slightly tilted up or tilted down, but this is just a tiny little shape right there. Then I'm going to walk down the nose and do a plumb line. So probably the best I'm actually see, I have to put up more paint. Already gone through my cappuccino. More out. Okay. So since I'm not going to paint details in the eyes yet, what I do tell people is that maybe just put a tiny, tiny little dot for where the tear duct is. And the only reason why I say that is, like, you see, I just put a little dot so that I can do my plumb line. Because I want to see exactly where the nose comes to that tear duct. So that is the very first, most important measurement that you will do. So I see that the vertical was just to the left and then straight down. Now, what I do is I see how I walked over the light shape over here. Now I'm going to walk over the light shape, because you have to tell me exactly where the bottom of this eye comes, this puzzle piece. So you can't be iffy about it. You can't just be wishy-washy and have some of these edges be kind of going off too much. You have to show me, or you know, where this kind of comes, where this comes, where this comes, where this comes. Because this is the shape that I jump over now. I come down to here and I walk over the distance of here to the top of the wing of the nose. This is a shorter distance than the shadow to the bottom. So I first figured out where my vertical is, and then I do this little jump. It's really all about just remembering these steps. I chose this 3/4 too because it's a very, you know, it's a very just important thing about doing your plumb lines. A lot of times people understand that when they're doing a front on, but this is so incredibly important to get this outer, because you're going to just be doing plumb lines, and plumb lines where the mouth is, plumb lines where the cheek is, all these things. So I walk over to the top of the wing of the nose, and then from here to the bottom of the nose is an easier jump. And also, the top of the wing of the nose usually shows you where the highlight is. So that also helps you, because the highlight helps you to see exactly where the nose starts to turn under. And then I don't look in there. So I don't look into where the nostril is. I just fill in. So this is a big dark, one dark of the face, and then underneath the nose. Especially because this lighting is so strong, I don't even really have to squint, and I mean, you should always squint, but it's like so obvious. So you see how I walk down and I see that this shape goes all the way down here and then angles here. It's really just getting yourself to walk the edge of a shadow and not look inside that shadow. But the shadow can be a value 5, the shadow could be a value 2. But it's literally just seeing that whole shadow as a shape in itself, and that trying your hardest not to want to over-explain. So now I put my brush up to the screen and I see exactly where this comes. Because remember I told you it was important for me to get the eyes, because I need to know where that plumb line is for that shape that's like on the top of that lip. Where does that come to the nose bridge? And it just comes a centimeter to the right. So that's how, it's like once you see these steps, you can block in a face pretty fast. And it's like a landscape artist blocking in things. And I'm not overly worried about, exact likeness, but as long as I align things, as long as I get the bigger things, then a little tweak here and there will, maybe help it look a little bit like her, but I'm just not going to worry that much. Okay, so now.
My biggest problem is just exactly what you're doing, painting dark over white.
Uh-huh.
Because you put the white, even though you didn't use much of a thinner, you kept the paint extremely thin so that you could go over it, because.
Well, but I had to put enough here because it was mixing through. So
Right.
I had to reestablish. So I don't know if you noticed, I put a stroke down and then have to put more paint on it. Put a stroke down and have to put more paint on it. I think what happens is you put a stroke down and the paint underneath is mixing through, and you're trying to get the drawing so much that you're not realizing that you see how I can see this paint is mixing. So me just scumbling. So I'm just going to scumble. You see how light that got? So it's just the actual friction of me moving my brush over and over again on top of lighter paint. So you have to just put a stroke down and leave it, put a stroke down and leave it, put a stroke down and leave it. Now, you can do that initial home, and you can do it pretty thin and let it tack up for a tiny bit, or, that type of thing. But,
Right.
yeah, so I just noticed that from myself, I have to reestablish paint, or else just, if I keep my brush like this, you see how much lighter than that is than underneath the nose. And it's just because my brush was mushing paint, that's all.
Also, I noticed it looks like there's, in addition to putting a darker note where the tear duct is, it looks like on the screen anyway that there's 2 dots like for the eyebrows or at the top of the eyeshadow. Are those just?
Oh, it's just brush strokes. It's not
Okay.
like, it doesn't have any meaning. It was just me
That
filling
looks
this
silly.
in, and then just
Okay.
like probably the light hitting that brush stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
no,
what I was-
there's absolutely no drawing inside that eye yet. So anything you see, which can be, and that's the tricky thing about video. I'm sure you guys know, sometimes we take photos of stuff, and you know how cameras like completely over accentuate. They make things overly contrasty, right? And so then it's like sometimes,
And
like,
you're seeing this a little from the side too, so.
oh yeah, and also you're
Glare
seeing the
can be a
painting
little
just the
different.
tiniest bit from the side because of the way the video is. I'm actually gonna buy a GoPro so that I can wear a camera because I feel like we've done so many videos. See, I'm also doing that vertical plumb line to see where that dark comes in underneath that lip too, because where the edge of the lip came over here, where this came, now where the middle of the lip came, now where the chin comes, everything will fall in place if you just fill things in. I'm going to reiterate, you have to have an edge. So you have to have the edge of the nose right here. You have to have the edge right there, edge. You have to have distinct boundaries, borders, because you then need to be able to have something to do your plumb lines off of. If everything is a little bit too wishy-washy, then you can't have a border to actually even, see what you would do the plumb line coming down. So that's probably one of the things that I've noticed is that people tend to just, they're a little bit too, it's commitment, it's committing to a shape. And people think that they want to go back to it. Like, oh, I don't know if it's perfect. I'm going to come back to it. I don't know if it's perfect. I'm going to come back to it. And I'm like, well, at least commit to something because it's easier to judge if something's off if you've committed and then look back, step back. But if everything is just a little bit too soft, then you're kind of giving yourself an out to kind of be like, well, I'm not exactly sure, so I'm just not going to put it. And you're like, well, then it's harder to judge, So
Now, what would you do at this point or at this point? Like, oh my gosh, I made that eye too low or too high. How would you fix that?
Oh, I would just completely take some of that skin color and just reestablish, literally reestablish. I would just bring this color, and so that's why it's good to make piles on your palette, because you can literally take this exact value, exact color, and carve it back, just like a kneaded eraser. So let me have this. So say I didn't like it, I would just carve it down and just paint, but I have to have a thick enough stroke, So, but you have a pile already, and that's why it's good to have a home base. And that's another thing that I find people tend to, they paint their skin tones a little blotchy. So you have a little bit of blue here, and a little bit of gray here, and a little bit of pink here. And so they're trying to put too many colors into a home base because they think that, I don't know, they've seen other people do stuff like that, so they want to have those mauves and those greens, and they want to have those colors, but then it's almost too pure violet right there, too pure blue right there, too pure pink right there. Everything is just a little bit too pure, and if you just make more of a neutral, so I'm just going to smooth this out so you don't see any drawing in there, because I think brushwork can be a little deceiving, if it catches glare.
Basically, you're fixing problems by just using more paint instead of wiping anything away.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you can wipe it away, but but that's why you mix these pre-piles so that, I can go in here and I can just clean up this edge and carve it, and just with that exact same value. So, but getting yourself to do that is a hurdle because it's just a better habit. So just see how I'm just kind of filling in, because I think too, I told you guys that that black will start to show through. So I'm just sort of filling in this, and it's not very painterly, and people think, oh well, I'm painting right up to this edge, right up to this edge, right up to this edge, because art or making something look very quote unquote artsy usually happens on the transitions. So the edges in between where light and dark meet. That's where you put your prettiest color. That's where you start to think about like edges is something hard, is something soft, and the simple shapes, like the simple planes of this light, the simple plane of that shadow, in all honesty, should be left simple. It's just getting that right value so that you can leave it there and not finicky it, you know, so anyways, but I'm trying to be as angly as possible, and but painting on top. See, I want you to see how too. I walk down. I kind of like reestablishing my drawing. So the distance between here and here. Walk. The distance here. The distance between here and this shadow. The distance here between this and this angle before it goes up. Okay, walking over that bottom lip, walking over this chin. You know, so it's a lot of reestablishing. How I would clean up my outer edge is I'm just going to use, you know, probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some black because I want, so I'm going to clean it up just like using that value in the background and carving back. Uh-oh, did something happen? Uh-oh.
We can still hear you.
Something's here. Well, somebody's making, is there falling? Somebody falling?
I think they're just adjusting their computer.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm just going to carve back the background because I'm not going to even worry about the background being like fancy. So I'm really just mixing a black, and so I'm trying to putting my brush up to see exactly where the farthest part of the nose is before it starts to angle down. And as you start to study noses and things, I don't like to be like 100%, but a lot of times you start to see that the farthest part or the highlight tends to be on the higher than you think, because that's the farthest part out before it starts to turn down. So it's just something to think about. You know, when you're really studying highlights, it's really important to see exactly where that highlight is. So I'm double checking every alignment. So as I go down, I double check exactly where this is. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. You know, like sometimes our brains fill in. You see how I'm just sort of like carving in? That black is like mixing with some of that skin tone, so I have to put more paint on my brush because otherwise. So don't worry so much about super soft edges because sometimes if you're too soft, it's like you lose all structure. You can always soften at the end. As long as you get structure and angles, a few soft edges here and there is all you need. I just know from experience that like when I would go way too soft, it's like, oh, it's kind of, I don't know, like people don't have bone. So I'm putting my brush up to like how far is the bottom lip come to the top lip? You know, every single thing you can measure. Okay, how far does the chin come to the bottom lip? Which is a very tiny little chin. It's much farther in than, because she's slightly tilted forward too, and that's something else we have to override because our brains will straighten a face. So tilts are tricky. See how I kind of carve in there? So I keep establishing, I want you guys, you can't really see this, but every time I move back, I'm putting more paint on my brush. More paint. You see, I'm doing my vertical. Once you get the hang of this, profiles will be your friends because they'll be easier than doing a front on. Also, the great thing about like these type of things is that if you have a shadow, you see how you can kind of lose the edge here because when shadow is going into the darkness of the background, you can really soften that edge. So every time I do something, I'm doing a vertical to see where it comes. I think I have to bring in this nose a little bit. So I never do a exterior nose like this just by, guessing. I always think about this cross, I think about this, I walk and do these little jumps, and usually I'm having to bring in the nose a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to figure out the forehead. Really, I guess the thing for me was I wanted to show you guys how I fill in the home base. So that was my important idea. And to not paint up to things, so it is the idea of painting through. That's what I mean, is through is like the larger shape, and then painting any sort of eye thing or eyebrow will be painted on top of this. And the whole idea is hopefully you just kind of lay it on top without getting rid of any kind of prettier strokes that is underneath. Okay, I'm trying to look for a small brush that I can. You're always trying to find the perfect brush, and you're like, where is it?
I've got some brushes.
No, I'm just, I'm trying to figure out where that perfect brush would be. Oh, this would be good. I'll use this one. I really like angled, short-haired brushes too, because you can carve and almost draw and carve at the same time, So you see how this is like an angled brush? So I can put my brush down here and either paint the background out or the forehead in, and you see how I can kind of create a very sharp angle like that. Instead of trying to use a filbert or a round or something, and then you see how the forehead kind of comes up here, changes direction, and goes back towards the hair. And so I've just been using that Capuchin Deep and white. So everything has just been that. So it's just been a tonal painting so far. Now, if I was if I was going to get fancy, well, I could have a warmer and cooler version. I'm just kind of having this disappear. Have a warmer and cooler version of red. So I could have Cad Red, which would be a slightly warmer red, as my lights or shadows. And then I could have, so one thing I do want to possibly just let you know that is that if you are going to start playing with warms and cools of one tone or one color, try to, this might take a while to sink in, because it took a while for me to sink in, believe me, is that have predominant one temperature be your shadow and the other temperature be your light. Okay, so let me explain that. So I did a blue painting, and I was painting with this blues, and I was really struggling. I was going back and forth, and it dawned on me, it was like a light bulb moment, where I was like, I was not committing to have one temperature be my shadows and one temperature be my lights, meaning that I was mixing them together too much and it was becoming hodgepodge. So I really then had to decide that I was going to make the Viridian be more of my warm blue and the ultramarine be more of my cool blue, right? And so that then made it so that it looked like it was more of a cool light source. And it's all relative because they're both cool. But on the grander scheme of things, the Viridian was warmer because it has some yellow in it. And so when you put them next to each other, it's like the eye understood it, even though it was so subtle. So I hope that makes sense. And then you can do that the exact same thing with reds. So I'm just kind of, see how I'm just sort of putting like darks down for the hair. I'm walking over the eye socket and seeing exactly where like this shadow of the hair kind of comes in and how the shadow of the hair sort of blends in. It really almost disappears with the cheek. And I'm not worried at all about what's going on in the eyes or anything, because hopefully I could just pop those. I'm just going to put a little bit of a tone over the lip because I think the lip got a little too light.
Susan, I know that it can be controversial because I see ultramarine as a warmer, cool color, also like a warmer blue. So you see it more as a cooler blue.
That's the definition of.
I'll let Scott talk about that.
Well, we've had people when we've been in workshops. There were some really famous artists.
But I mean, ultramarine has a little bit of purple in it.
Well, it comes down very much to your definition of what is cooler. What is
what
the
about
warmest
brand?
warm? What is the warmest warm? Is it yellow or is it red? So artists that define red as the warmest will generally see the blue that has a little more, is a little more towards the red. Whereas if you think yellow is the definition of the warmest, then you're going to go more for a cobalt or something that has a little bit of blue in it. I mean, a little bit of yellowish. Or on the wheel, it goes more towards the yellow or blue. So we've heard that argument many times, and usually when people are arguing, they ask me, I say, I bet you define the warmest as red and you define the warmest as yellow, and they'll say, right. And I say, so that's really what you're arguing about more, is the definition of what is warm and what is
But also certain
cooler.
brands, like to me, a lot of times when I'm using ultramarine blue, it has a little spit, and I think even the paint people told me, I mean, the ultramarine part has like a little bit hint of purple in it. So it's like, oh, okay. Now maybe certain brands might be different, right? And that's the tricky part, because we have to all be on the same side when we're looking at something. Now,
Well, those are just definitions, really, of
Right,
what.
the way Scott explained it, it still makes sense in that context though, because you're saying yellow is the warmest, like warmer than the red. So it still kind of makes sense in the context of how Scott explained it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Also, isn't it a matter of like, if you're looking at two colors next to each other, even if both of them would individually would normally be cool, which is warmer than the other, which is cooler than the other, is how
Sometimes I find it more helpful to say which is a little yellower or a little redder. Go more for a primary thing. I usually think of, when I look at a color, I think, does it need more yellow, red, or bluish in it? Those three. So because warm and cool, it's hard to break down colors into just two, a warmer and a cooler version. But that's how I usually will think of it. I'm usually mixing two versions of things, but it can be complicated when you're trying to actually have a discussion about it, and we're all have different ideas of, I don't know if that makes sense, but I find that one of the most complicated discussions to have, warm and cool.
well, and that's it, because to me, it was like I felt, well, obviously the Viridian was warmer than the ultramarine. So you might think that ultramarine is warm, but Viridian next to the ultramarine is even warmer. So it was even relative in that little partnership right there.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a challenging one, warm and cool, comparing different colors to each other.
So I want you to see how I carve in the background. Then just a little bit here and there, I just realized, oh, well, that shadow underneath the nose or underneath the top lip or underneath the bottom lip, the value underneath those are so close to the background that I can then smush them together, or I can put a value right next to it so that there's a transition. But it's, when you see really strong light and dark like this, you can just you don't have to look into there. So that's a great way of when you're lighting things, is that if the values are really close together, try not to over explain, because our brains want to do that. Our brains want to over explain and look into things that we can't see. So sometimes when I'm critiquing people's work, like they're literally looking at a black and white photo where the side of the face is 100% in shadow, and they're giving me information in the drawing. And so, it's difficult for me to critique that, because I'm like, well, I mean, you see that even if you wanted to, you're just like, oh, but I really want to see that eye, then I almost have to say, well, then you should have, it's a responsibility to have, remember I told you how it's like you have the image beforehand to, so that you're not like, it's not like you're not fighting the image. But a lot of times people will even ask me, like, well, is it okay to completely change on the photo? And I'm like, okay, sure, like, you can make things up, but it also has to make sense, because sometimes what happens is people will say, like, they'll have certain light on the face, but then once it went down to the clothes, the lighting will be totally different. And I'm like, well, but it's not under the same logic. Like, you can make the values lighter if you want. You can, change the drawing a little bit if you want. You can, some people do that, they exaggerate things. But to have different lighting on the face than the clothes, that is something that I don't think is probably a practical thing to do. And, it's just me suggesting it to them for them to think in a certain way, because sometimes we don't even know we're doing it, or sometimes, so you see how I'm playing around with down here because she has such a tiny little jaw. I'm wondering like how much to put in, but the more I touch it, the more paint comes down here and the more it gets a little bit out of focus. So then, it's all about, oh, how much do I want to show, blah, 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 all that stuff. And these are the areas that like I can find myself, working on for like an hour. But these are the type of little studies that I would say time yourself. Like literally say, I'm going to work on this for an hour, and and whatever I get is what I get. And it's a learning thing. And it's hopefully not something that you feel obligated or like, oh, I have to like make it a finished piece.
Looks so cool, Sue.
Because it's probably going to be a lot more exciting to be slightly left unfinished. So I'm just going to go down here and see exactly where that neck is. And only towards the very end will I even pop in an eye. Because I'm just practicing like a landscape artist would, It's like, oh, right, the light's changing. Oh, I just need to get in these bigger shapes. Oh, okay, what are these angles? And what are the relationships? And learning how to use my brushes and how much paint to put on and all this stuff. So everything I'm doing is all like programming, so that you have muscle memory. So that's what it is. It's just muscle memory to angle this, muscle memory to do this, muscle memory to constantly do my verticals.
Susan, as you're working, I know you on your monitor you have both the posterized and the regular black and white. Are you looking at one versus the other for the most part?
I'm looking at both of them. I feel that the posterized one is so extreme that sometimes if I look at it too much, then I find that it can be a hazard. So I'm probably, it's 50-50, but probably now I'm going to be looking mainly at just the one that's not posterized. The posterized one to me is a lesson in not looking at details and inside the shadow. But then once you get the big shapes, then you have to kind of go to the real version. Because you need to also train yourself from that version, because when you're painting from life or something, you're not going to have a posterized. So you see how I'm painting right through the ear? So all of this, what I consider one shape. Literally from here, people would want to give so much information in here, and I'm just going to say, like, no, I'm just going to give it one big value, and only at the very end, kind of like, you know, how much am I going to edit? Just at the very, very end will I say I need one little accent here or there, one little thing here or there. And so I'll put my brush up and see exactly maybe where the back of the head comes, underneath the nose. Okay, maybe I'll do that quick little, you know, that little measurement like that, just so that I don't get the head too big or too small. Where's the back of the neck? And I'm going to paint that value. I have a tiny bit of black in my hair color too, but a little bit of just this red and black. I'm painting through that scarf, keeping my brush down and scumbling. Everybody's going to be a little bit different how your brushwork is. I'm going to say, I suggest try to use like the biggest brushes you can in the beginning. Get used to using big, just like Scott loves using that rubber tool now. You see how it allowed him to be really, really big. And simplify. These are the type of things too that I find that I like to look at upside down too, because especially when I have a tilt, I just know. It's so funny how I tend to over tilt, or I tend to like not be able to see tilts really well. So it's a funny thing. I think I'm just not spatially like some people who can just draw things out really, really well. And so the bigger the brush I have at this point is probably, you know, just makes it look more painterly. So yeah, the bigger the brush, the more painterly. And then hopefully I can leave a lot of these, like, I'm just gonna have, you know, hint at a bun up there. And you know, the darkness of the paper is kind of helping me keep that hair. And then just do like a little bit of a top of the head. See, I'm going to do a quick little measurement just so from the eyebrow, just so I can see where that top of that scarf comes. But I have to make sure that the scarf stays in shadow also. So remember I was saying that the hair is under the same light source, so you can't have like the scarf be lighter than the hair surrounding it. It's just, it won't look, you have to like, the scarf has to be in shadow too, and that is something that I think people have this idea that because it's fabric or something, it can look different, but I'm gonna smooth out some of these brushwork in here because maybe the video camera is probably overemphasizing some of this stuff. And it has nothing to do with technique. Like whatever I'm painting, I'm not at all doing a technique demo today. It's all about just extreme block in, how to simplify, and most importantly, how to do these plumb lines. So you see how I'm going back to my plumb line to get this neck again. Going back to the plumb line. And if you soften your edges too much, you won't be able to know exactly where something aligns. So cleaning up this, and then comes right. The more I leave unsaid, actually, it's like Scott was saying that he loves his block-ins sometimes, and that he finds that he, just touches it too much, like all of us, right? Like he has so much fun, or he thinks his block-ins can be great, and then literally hours, days, weeks later, since we film so much of our work, sometimes it can be like heartbreaking for us to see our own work kind of fall apart because we're like, well, God, our block-in was so fun. And then for some reason, we either fell asleep. I keep doing my vertical to find out where the point of the forehead is. Please just see how I keep doing that, because that's the thing that you fall asleep doing. It's like you just forget. You forget to keep doing those plumb lines. So anyway, that's why if you feel like you're getting too stiff, too stodgy in your painting, force yourself to do these 1 hour block-ins. And if you can, don't even do an eye. Don't even do detail. Just do these larger things and just do a bunch of them over and over and over and over. Because that's how landscape artists get so good, right? Is that they go out there for half hour, 20 minutes, whatever, and they do block-ins. And then they become masters at them. So you see how I just take paint and I'm carving, so I just carve like the black back in. So you just carve the black back in, just kind of carve that hair, kind of carve. So if I get the stuff too high up there, you just carve that background back in. It's, a little bit harder if you have like a white canvas, because in general, you're not just using like white paint to carve back in, but if you have the abstract stuff, then it might be easy because you can kind of, just pick what's back there. But all right, so I think I'll do 1 or 2 strokes. Oh yeah, because it's almost 2 o'clock. So I'll do 1 or 2 strokes in the eye. And so I think first of all is to do a dark on top of that. So let me take a small brush.
By the way, today's Sue's birthday.
Oh,
Happy birthday!
Oh,
Happy birthday!
Oh my gosh,
happy birthday. Thank you. Yeah. Doing my favorite thing, painting with fun art friends. Okay. So I'm only looking at the real one. In fact, I'm going to take the posterize down, because once posterize helps to a certain a time, so that was a good question. But then it just doesn't help anymore, right? So I'm just taking the pure dark red all by itself, and I'm going to just see exactly where, because the ball is, where is that darkest part of the eye? Where does it come? There's that tear duct. Squinting. Her eyelashes are so strong. Be careful about opening your eyes and thinking that you see white of the eye, because that so-called white of the eye is the same value as that initial or even darker, because the eyelashes create an umbrella effect. So I'm trying to reestablish paint, so put down a stroke, and then I reestablish and put down a stroke, because I'm painting dark on top of a value. So now that value that I put in now becomes my middle value. So that's the whole idea, is to sort of, paint this whole big shape, and then hopefully pop in a few darks on top of it, and then all of a sudden, this will become your, depending on how dark you do it, your predominant eyelid or eye.
What brush are you using?
I'm using a Series 81. It's like a little filbert, soft filbert.
Rosemary brush.
Rosemary, but yeah, like, it's really like any brush that's like just the size of what you're painting. Sometimes, like a scraggly old brush will really work. Trying to just paint around this like lid a little bit, and then, really the whole idea is to hopefully put these strokes in and not overdo it. I think I am going to go to a more scraggly brush now to get that underlid. This is like pretty rockin', but I hope it's showing up that you put this big shape and then you put your dark shapes on top. So then I'm just putting this dark. The scraggly brush will help you kind of soften the edge as you paint, whereas, you know, a newer brush or a harder edge brush. She's such a beautiful underlid that I would hate to like. What happens is people tend to like make eyes too small, you know, so they get higher and higher and higher and higher, and it's because I don't know, we don't think that the underlid is as important. I'm squinting the whole time. There's like her eyelash, but I have to really be careful because her eyelashes are so long and they create such a shadow. So, and you can tweak and needle this eye forever, and the more you touch it, the lighter it will get, right? So you can keep touching it and touching it, but just be careful about going in here and adding white, adding any sort of value that like brings out that white of the eye. I'm going to put a little bit of a dark for an eyebrow. So I kind of walk up, and that triangle of the eyebrow starts right here. And there's always at least two values for the eyebrow. There is that value that kind of goes above the brow ridge and gets a little bit of light, and then there's that dark accent that kind of is underneath the brow ridge that is kind of going into the head.
Gorgeous. When you said scraggly brush, what did you mean exactly?
Just a brush where the hairs get older and like splay a little bit, but not so, you know, perfect. They get a little bit frayed. Yeah, no, those, you know, brushes that are older are perfect for, you know, laying in something and, you know, just kind of like laying it in and then just leaving it. If a brush is like is very new, then, you know, you get a more overall like uniform brush stroke, right? So I've really been consciously trying to not go lighter in any of this because I do see her eyelid a little bit light, but it's really only because she has such an extremely large eye. In general, I would be able to leave that for a normal person, but I'm gonna just maybe half a value, and I have to be careful because the lighter you go on the eyelid, the more they look like a bug. So I'm just going to put a little bit right here. And I have to just make sure that anything I put in her eyelid isn't as light as this. So even though it looks like it in the photo, be careful, you guys. Eyelids are not going to be as light as like the cheek. First of all, because it's actually a smaller surface, it's actually interior. So the cheek is getting more light and it's actually farther out from the eye. So that's all. It's just something to remind yourself that not to make the eyelids as bright as the forehead. All right, oops. See, I just touched it again. It got too light. Put my little dark back in. And also, it's true, how you touch the paint shows glare, right? So sometimes glare will really affect the way you see your paint because it will look lighter. And, you know, sometimes maybe at the end of the day painting, or maybe like Scott does the next day, his paint is still a little bit tacky and he goes in and he taps down some of his strokes so that, very slightly, you know, so he's not changing drawing and he's not changing the brushiness, it's just maybe just tapping down a little bit so that, you know, the camera, see I'm just putting a little bit of a value right here just to show that brow ridge is turning in a little bit. This is very, very fast, and so I would consider this almost like a, kamikaze portrait block-in. And I think of it as like, okay, Susan, you're training yourself. You're training yourself to like think big. You're training yourself just to think in value, not worried about technique, not worried about if it resembles her. As long as as long as the angles of the eyes and the nose and the mouth are all going in the same direction, it's like, okay, you can say that the head is slightly tilted down and being fine. But I'm not going to like overly stress about like, oh my gosh, is that her nose to the exact T? Is this to the exact T? Because do you think landscape artists do that? No, so it's all about like just thinking fast and big, and that's why I'm just using one color. I'm not even worried about, oh, what's a perfect flush. So I'm just kind of mushing this together so that hairline disappears. Yeah. So what I thought I would do is I'll upload this particular photo to the library, and I think you guys should try this and try it in the same amount of time that I'm doing. And it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of like you might not be as fast, right? But maybe it's the practicing of laying in large shapes. It's the practicing of plumb lines. So if anything, this is all about plumb lines. It's all about getting in the eye shapes, painting through the big shapes, and then just reminding yourself to do plumb lines over and over and over again. So I think I'm going to stop, or I could just keep painting forever, right? So I'm going to stop because I guess we'll quickly look to see if anybody uploaded some homework. And I'll just do a few suggestions. So, okay.
So you can still use a little bristle.
Oh yeah, I'm doing you can use any brush. You can use any brush you want. The only thing about bristle is that the bristle is going to take paint away and it's going to show teeth. Whereas a softer brush will allow you to leave the paint down without picking up as much. And you see, it's like a softer brush will just leave the paint down. Whereas when I had that bristle brush, it scumbled and it picked it up a little bit. So, but there's no right or wrong. It's like you figure it out, because if you paint thick enough, then your bristle brush won't be a problem at all, Like Scott would definitely paint thick enough that he can use any brush he wants. So, okay, so yeah. There you go, just trying to fill this in so that it doesn't, I don't want it to be all about technique. It's all about just filling in. Filling in. Right.
Susan,
Yeah.
what was the medium that you use on the paper?
This was just ivory black and Gamsol. But if you want to seal the paper and have it be really not sink in at all, then you can either do a clear gesso underneath the ivory black. You could do that to make it so that it's completely sealed.
Okay,
Okay.
I have some paper and I haven't used it yet, so.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like it both. So it's just, when you don't have it completely sealed, it feels a little bit dry and it has a different texture, so that when you do drag paint over it, sometimes you get that little bit of a dry texture, which could look fun, So